welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever sort of scratched your head wondering why a company that, seems to be doing great suddenly hits a wall?
No, absolutely. Like soaring sales, positive headlines, and then bam, trouble.
Exactly. You think about Krispy Kreme, their stock plummeted even with good earnings reported.
Hmm.
Or, the classic case, W.T. Grant bankrupt despite looking okay on the income statements.
Right. And the mystery, the real story, is often hidden away deep inside their financial statements. It's not always in the splashy
That's
headline.
in the fundamentals. So today we're taking a deep dive into those core documents, the balance sheet and the statement of cash flows.
Our mission really is to take these sometimes complex accounting ideas, the stuff you find in textbooks, and turn them into clear, practical insights you can actually use.
But this isn't just for accountants, right? It's for anyone who wants to be well-informed. We want to give you a shortcut to assessing a company's real health, maybe even predicting its future.
Yeah, whether you're prepping for a meeting, looking at an investment, or honestly just curious about how businesses tick, we'll dig into the surprising stuff often buried in those texts.
Okay, let's get started. Where should we begin? The balance sheet.
Perfect place. The balance sheet, or the statement of financial position, as it's also called, think of it like a photo, a financial snapshot of a company at one specific moment in time.
The snapshot. Okay, so what does it capture in that moment?
It tells you what the company owns, those are its assets, what it owes its liabilities, and crucially, what's left over for the earners, the stockholders, that's stockholders' equity.
Assets, liabilities, equity. The basic accounting equation right there.
Exactly. And that snapshot is incredibly useful. It helps you predict future cash flows, for one.
How so?
Well, assets kind of hint at future cash coming in, while liabilities point to future cash going out. But more broadly, it lets you gauge the company's health using three key ideas: liquidity, solvency, and financial flexibility.
Okay, let's break those down. Liquidity.
Liquidity is all about the short term. How quickly can the company turn assets into cash? Or how soon do its debts need to be paid? It's vital for knowing if they can cover their immediate bills.
So high liquidity generally means lower risk.
In the short term, yes. Then there's solvency. That's the long-term view.
Yeah.
Can the company pay its debts down the road as they mature?
So if a company has tons of debt compared to its assets.
Its solvency is lower, yeah. And that usually means higher long-term risk.
Got it. And the third one, financial flexibility. That sounds interesting.
It really is. It's about resilience. Can the company adapt? Can it change its cash flows if something unexpected happens, good or bad?
Like a global pandemic shutting down your entire industry.
Exactly. Think about Carnival Corporation.
Yeah.
Cruises stop, revenue goes to zero overnight, but they had a strong balance sheet, like $7.6 billion in liquidity.
Wow.
Yeah, so they could announce, hey, we can keep going for over a year, even with no money coming in. That's financial flexibility saving the day. It's about survival.
That's a powerful example. But the balance sheet isn't perfect, right? You mentioned limitations.
Definitely not perfect. There are some really important limitations to keep in mind. First, big one, historical cost. Most things are listed at what the company originally paid for them, not what they're worth today.
So if Amazon bought land years ago and it's now worth way more.
You wouldn't see that increase on the balance sheet, not until they sell it. It just shows the original purchase price.
That seems like a pretty big blind spot. What else?
Well, there's a heavy reliance on judgments and estimates. Think about Dell. They have to estimate how many customers won't pay their bills or guess how long their equipment will last for depreciation purposes.
Those aren't exact numbers then.
Not at all. They're
Uh-huh.
educated guesses, but they can have a big impact on the final figures. And finally, the balance sheet simply omits a lot of valuable stuff.
Like what?
Think about Intel. Their brilliant engineers, their customer loyalty, their research advantage. Hugely valuable, right? But you won't find employee brainpower listed as an asset.
Huh? No, I guess not.
Or think about Apple. They might have massive commitments to buy components in the future, which aren't technically liabilities yet, so they might only appear in the footnotes, not on the main balance sheet. It reminds you that the numbers don't capture everything.
Okay, so given these limitations, how do we make the best use of what is there? Classification seems important.
Absolutely critical. Just showing total assets isn't very helpful. Accountants classify items usually current versus non-current, specifically so you can analyze liquidity, solvency, and flexibility.
Makes sense. So under assets, what's current?
Current assets are cash or things expected to turn into cash, be sold, or used up within 1 year, or the company's operating cycle, whichever is longer. So obviously, cash itself.
And things easily converted to cash.
Right, like short-term, highly liquid investments, think money market funds or certificates of deposit maturing soon. Also, receivables, money owed to the company, usually by customers, and inventories, the goods ready for sale.
Like Stanley Black& Decker, showing their tools at different stages, raw materials, work in progress, finished goods.
Exactly. Then you have non-current assets. These are the long-term investments and foundations of the business.
Property, plant, and equipment.
Yep. Property, plant, and equipment, tangible things used in operations like land, buildings, machinery. Think Mattel using factories to make toys.
And you mentioned leases before.
Right, that's a newer thing. If Mattel has a long-term lease for a factory, that right to use the factory is now treated as a non-current asset too. It reflects the economic reality.
Okay. What else is non-current?
We also have intangible assets, things without physical substance, but often very valuable. Patents, copyrights, trademarks, goodwill.
Goodwill is when you buy another company for more than its identifiable assets are worth, right?
Precisely. And it's fascinating how this category evolves. Like now, cryptocurrency holdings are often accounted for right here as indefinite life intangibles. Imagine PepsiCo develops a new secret formula that patent is a key intangible asset.
Okay. Switching sides. Liabilities. Same classification. Current versus long-term.
Pretty much. Current liabilities are obligations the company expects to settle within that same 1 year or operating cycle time frame, usually using current assets.
So, paying suppliers, accounts payable, paying employees, wages payable, taxes.
Yep, those are common ones. But also things like unearned revenue.
Unearned revenue. That sounds odd.
It's when a company gets paid before delivering the goods or services. Think magazine subscriptions, airline tickets bought in advance, or gift cards. Starbucks, for example, has a ton of unearned revenue from people loading up their gift cards. It's a liability because Starbucks still owes them coffee or food.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. And long-term liabilities.
Those are obligations due beyond that 1 year or operating cycle window. Think bonds payable, long-term bank loans, mortgages. Also includes things like pension obligations or long-term lease liabilities.
And you mentioned footnotes being important here.
Especially here. For long-term debt, the notes often contain crucial details, interest rates, maturity dates, and any special conditions or restrictions called covenants. Verizon Wireless, for instance, has extensive notes detailing the terms of its significant debt. You need to read those.
Good tip. That leaves owner's equity.
Right, the residual. What's left after you subtract liabilities from assets? It's the owner's claim on the company.
And it's broken down.
Usually into a few key parts. Capital stock, representing the par value of shares issued. Additional paid-in capital, which is the amount investors paid above par value. Retained earnings, the profits the company has kept and reinvested over time. And sometimes things like treasury stock, which are shares the company bought back. General Mills provides a clear example in their statements.
So, looking at all these current items, there's a common calculation, right? Working capital.
Yes, super practical. Working capital is simply current assets minus current liabilities. It's a quick measure of the company's buffer of liquid resources available in the short term.
Usually you want that to be positive.
Generally, yes, but it's more than just a number. How companies manage working capital can be strategic. Remember Macy's and Kohl's extending payment terms to suppliers.
Yeah, paying them much later.
Right, sometimes 120, even 180 days. That boosts their working capital because they hold on to cash longer. But it can really squeeze their suppliers. It shows working capital management can be a competitive tool or weapon, depending on your perspective.
Okay, so the balance sheet is that snapshot. What about the video? The movement of cash.
Now we're talking about the statement of cash flows. This is arguably just as crucial, maybe even more so in some situations, because, well, cash is king.
Why is it so important? Doesn't the income statement show profit?
It shows accrual profit, which includes revenues earned even if cash wasn't received, and expenses incurred even if not yet paid. The cash flow statement tracks the actual cash coming in and going out. A company can look profitable on paper, but run out of cash if it doesn't manage its cash flow well.
Like W.T. Grant again.
Exactly. Their income looked okay, but their cash flow from operations was deteriorating badly, signaling the bankruptcy long before the income statement did. Cash generally doesn't lie.
But wait, you said generally. Are there exceptions?
Yes, and this is really important for context. Consistently negative operating cash flow is usually a big warning sign. but not always. Think about Netflix in its heavy growth phase.
They were spending a fortune on making new shows, right?
A fortune, massive investments in content. So their operating cash flow was negative for years, even while they reported net income. That cash was going out the door for future growth. Eventually, it paid off, and operating cash flow turned strongly positive.
So you need to understand the why behind the numbers.
Precisely. Understand the strategy. The statement helps by breaking cash flows into three main buckets, or pillars.
Okay, what are they?
First, operating activities. This is the cash generated from, or used by, the company's main day-to-day business operations. Think cash received from customers minus cash paid for things like inventory, salaries, rent. It connects directly back to the items on the income statement.
Got it. Core business cash flow, what second?
Investing activities. This involves buying and selling long-term assets and other investments. So, cash spent buying new machinery, that's an investing outflow. Cash received from selling an old building, investing inflow, also includes making and collecting loans.
Okay, buying and selling the long-term stuff. And third,
Financing activities. This is all about how the company gets its funding and repays its providers of capital. It includes cash from issuing stock, cash paid out as dividends, cash borrowed from banks, and cash used to repay debt.
so operating is the core business, investing is long-term assets, financing is how it pays for everything.
That's a great summary. And preparing it involves starting with net income and then adjusting for all the non-cash items and changes in working capital accounts.
Like that Telemarketing Inc. example. If receivables go up, you subtract that from net income to get to cash flow.
Exactly. Because that income wasn't cash yet. If payables go up, you add it back. Because you recorded an expense but haven't paid the cash. It's about converting accrual to cash.
What about things that don't involve cash at all, like buying a building by issuing stock?
Great question. Those are called significant non-cash activities. They're important transactions, but since no cash changed hands, they don't go in the main body of the cash flow statement. Instead, they're disclosed separately, usually in the notes. Full disclosure principle again.
Makes sense. And just like the balance sheet, we can use cash flow numbers for ratios.
Absolutely. Some really insightful ones. The current cash debt coverage ratio, for example. It divides net cash from operating activities by average current liabilities.
Tells you how well operations cover short-term debt.
Precisely. And the cash debt coverage ratio does the same, but for total liabilities, giving you a longer time solvency perspective based on cash generation.
And you mentioned free cash flow. That sounds important.
It's a big one, especially for investors. Free cash flow is basically the cash left over from operations after the company has paid for essential capital expenditures, like maintaining or expanding factories, and paid its dividends.
So it's the truly discretionary cash.
Exactly. It's the cash available for expansion, paying down extra debt, buying back stock, or just building up a safety cushion. The Nestor company example shows how calculating it helps gauge that real financial flexibility. Positive free cash flow is generally a very healthy sign.
This is great. We've covered the two main statements, but you mentioned notes and disclosures multiple times. They seem critical.
They are absolutely integral. You can't fully understand the statements without them. The full disclosure principle in accounting basically says, provide information that is important enough to influence an informed user's judgment. When in doubt, disclose.
So what kind of key stuff is typically in these notes?
Well, first, the specific accounting policies the company uses. Are they using LIFO or FIFO for inventory? How do they depreciate assets? How do they recognize revenue? Microsoft, for instance, has detailed notes on its revenue recognition policies because it's complex. You need to know this to compare companies fairly.
And they disclose major estimates too.
Yes, significant estimates are also highlighted. Then you have details on contractual situations, things like lease terms, pension obligations, debt covenants, maybe major purchase commitments. Procter & Gamble often provides a neat table summarizing their future contractual cash outflows.
Okay, what else?
Contingencies. These are potential future gains or, more often, losses that depend on some future event. Think ongoing lawsuits. Costco, like many companies, will disclose potential losses from litigation if the loss is considered probable and they can reasonably estimate the amount.
And fair values. You touched on that.
Right. Especially for financial instruments, companies disclose their fair values. And importantly, they disclose how they determine that fair value using a hierarchy. Level 1 is best based on active market prices. Level 3 is most subjective based on the company's own models and assumptions. Devon Energy's notes show how they break this down.
And there are different ways to show this information.
Yeah.
Like not always long paragraphs in the notes.
Correct. There are various techniques of disclosure. Sometimes it's a quick parenthetical explanation right on the face of the statement, like Ford might put X million shares authorized and issued right next to common stock. Quick and easy.
That seems efficient.
It is. You also see cross-references linking related items or contra items showing deductions like accumulated depreciation. And sometimes for really complex areas like PP&E, they'll provide detailed supporting schedules.
And terminology matters too. You mentioned avoiding reserve.
Yeah, the profession tries to promote clear terminology. Reserve often sounds like cash set aside, but usually it's not. So, unless it's a specific appropriation of retained earnings, they discourage it. Same with vague terms like surplus. It's all about clarity for the user.
Clarity helps us move from raw numbers to actual insights, which brings us to ratios.
The power of ratios, indeed. Ratios take two numbers from the statements and express a relationship, a percentage, a rate, a proportion. It makes comparison much easier, like saying IBM's current assets are 1.18 times its current liabilities or 118%. That's more meaningful than just seeing the raw dollar amounts.
And there are different categories of ratios.
Generally, we group them into four major types. Liquidity ratios measuring short-term ability to pay debts, like the current ratio we just mentioned.
Okay.
Activity ratios measuring how effectively the company uses its assets. Think inventory turnover, how fast are they selling their stuff? Or asset turnover, how much sales do they generate for every dollar of assets?
Efficiency measures, got it.
Then, profitability ratios measuring success or failure. Profit margin, return on assets, earnings per share, EPS. These are probably the most commonly cited ones.
And the last type.
Coverage ratios. These look at the protection for long-term creditors and investors. Debt to assets ratio, times interest earned, how easily can earnings cover interest payments, and those cash debt coverage ratios we discussed earlier.
Wow. So using these different types together gives you a much richer picture of the company.
Exactly, a multifaceted view. You see liquidity, efficiency, profitability, and long-term stability. It's like looking at a diamond from different angles.
Okay, one last area. We operate in a global economy. How do these statements differ internationally? GAAP versus IFRS.
Good point. There are definitely similarities, but also key differences between U.S. Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, KP, and International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS. Both require balance sheets, though IFRS calls it a statement of financial position, and cash flow statements, and both require extensive disclosures.
But the format or details can vary.
Yes. For instance, IFRS often requires a classified statement, while under GAAP, the SEC mandates specific line items for public companies. A noticeable difference is the order of assets.
How so?
Under IFRS, current assets are often listed in reverse order of liquidity, so cash might be last. GAAP usually lists cash first. It's just a presentation difference, but good to be aware of.
Any other big ones?
Terminology differs slightly. IFRS uses share capital ordinary instead of common stock. And that term reserve we talked about. Discouraged under GAAP, but more common under IFRS. So you need to be mindful when comparing a U.S. company to, say, a European one.
Good to know. It's about understanding the language they're speaking.
Exactly. It's about getting beyond the numbers to what they actually mean.
So to recap this deep dive, the balance sheet is that critical snapshot assets, liabilities, equity at a point in time, key for assessing health via liquidity, solvency, flexibility.
Right, but with limitations like historical cost and estimates.
And the statement of cash flows is the video tracking actual cash movements from operating, investing, and financing activities. Absolutely vital, because cash is king.
And don't forget the notes. They provide essential context and detail through disclosures on policies, contracts, contingencies, and fair values. Using ratios helps synthesize all this information.
Absolutely. Mastering these tools really does give you the power to look past the headlines and make much more informed decisions. You're not just seeing numbers, you're starting to read the company's financial story.
Well put. It's about decoding that narrative.
Okay, so here's a final thought to leave you with. Given everything we've discussed, the power of these statements, but also their limitations, like not capturing employee knowledge or brand value, what other, maybe non-financial factors do you think are really crucial for truly understanding a company's long-term value and potential risks? What else matters beyond the numbers on the page? Something to think about.